microphones on, microphones off when speaking for the hard of hearing. Mobile phones off, please. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. So I've got apologies from Michael Mullaney, Councillor Ray Bhatia, who's has been substituted by Councillor Govind, welcome, and Lauren, whose father is ill, who's our legal advisor, is not here today. So we've got Anthony Cross, who's her number 2. On declarations for interest, which is item 2, I'm assuming that all city and county councillors will declare a personal interest in agenda item 10 on the agenda, project update training facility, service leadership and development centre, as the options being considered include land that is either owned by the city or the county. Are you all happy with that? Very good. Does anybody else have any further interest they wish to declare? None? We have an urgent item, so I've agreed to take an urgent item, just a verbal report on Day Cream Plus, following recent correspondence, which I've certainly received a lot of from members of the officers from the Fire Authority. The item is urgent because the latest development has occurred after the agenda for this meeting was circulated, and we need to agree a basis for moving forward. The report is exempt as it relates to employment matters and our legal position. If members are in agreement, we'll take this at the end of the agenda. So are you all happy to receive that? Okay, thank you very much. Chairman's announcements. I've circulated it, so I don't have to read it all out. Just to mention a couple of things. Obviously, I attended the Long Service Fire Awards at Bow Manor Hall, along with Mike Kapoor. A good day, as usual. Yes, the other one is the HMICFRS Service Liaison Lead and the publication of the State of the Fire and Rescue Service Report. And also another one which isn't highlighted on my agenda is obviously the conviction for the fire offences in Leicester, which Rick may well say a little bit about later. So if I just take this as read, and you all got it, is there any questions about it? No, good. Okay, also before you on the table are details of the LGA's fire conference and exhibition, which will be held on the 10th to 11th of March. Rick will be attending as the chief, and he's asked if any member would be interested in attending with him. This is a key event for senior fire officers and members of the fire and rescue authorities, so I'd like one of us to attend. So I can't attend. The next person I could ask to attend would be you, Colwinda. But if you can't attend, if either our side, your side, or the Liberal side suggests someone to Rick, shall we do it on a first-come, first-served basis? Yeah. So you're all aware? 10th to 11th of March, Betty. Sure.
Yeah, I won't be able to do it, but of course.
Sure. Well, as we've said, if you want to do it, you've all got your emails in front of you. I'll see who's tapping, and first one into Rick gets it. Okay. Public participation, CFA rules of procedure. We've had no questions received. So we now move to the minutes of the Combined Fire Authority. This was way back in September. These are pages 5 to 14 of your agenda pack, and I'll move that they're a true record. Can you second that, Linda?
I'll second
that. Are we all happy with those minutes? Excellent. Next, we consider the minutes of the Corporate Governance Committee held on the 18th of September 2019. I understand Betty chaired it. Somebody second, Betty? Thank you. All happy? Excellent. Our first item is budget planning. Treasurer will update us. So you know, from the new members here, Councillor Javind, you'll recognise Alison, who works for you in the city. She also works for us here. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to run through a presentation on the budget. You're not considering the budget today. The budget will come to the February meeting. But what I did think was it would be unfair of me to present the position and expect you to make a decision at the same meeting. So I thought it'd be helpful to set out the draft budget proposals as published, how we've arrived at those, what the future looks like, as much as I can predict it, in order for you to be able to think about any issues or questions or comments that you might want to then raise with me or the Chief before the February meeting or at the meeting itself. So really this is to tell you how we've arrived at the draft budget that is published in order for you to have time to think about that before February. So there's some slides behind you. I'm sorry for those members at the back, but I won't be offended if you're turning around. And I'm happy to circulate these after the meeting. So what I'm going to present to you today is the draft budget as proposed for 2021 and a really sort of high-level estimate of what the future might look like. A lot of these slides won't be news to you. Last year we set a one-year budget on the basis of the uncertainty over the funding of both fire and local government. What happened last year politically meant that none of those issues were resolved, and again, even more unusually, we're setting another one-year budget. So we have new pressures, fire in particular are facing new pressures in 2021. I've talked about the uncertainty. And the last two bullet points are really key. We really, because of the uncertainty, really should be avoiding making ongoing commitments at this stage when we really don't know what our base funding looks like going forward. And the budget contains some significant risks which I'll draw to your attention. So a little bit of background. Again, this is not news to you. Worst financial cuts ever experienced across the sector. Our grant from government since 2013 has been reduced by 64%, and I'll give you a visual of what that looks like. We are a low-tax fire authority. So when we compare ourselves, whether it's for inspection purposes or anything else, what we have to remember is the resources available to us comparatively is so much lower than other authorities. If we were just to increase, if we could, which we can't because of referendum principles, if we could just increase to the average, we would have £3.4 million per year more money. So there's the illustration of government grant. That shows you the impact really to us that that hasn't been replaced. So when we talk about previous budgets and IRMP where we had to make some difficult decisions, that is why. To give you a feel of how we compare, just even locally, so our council tax is £66.60 per year. Nottingham and Derby are considerably more, and then if you look, there's some quite big outliers there at Durham at £103. There is no easy way to say why we are where we are. It's a number of things, but we are where we are. If we were to increase council tax by and across the board £5, then we would be £1.6 million a year better off. The local government settlement consultation, which we have responded to because it includes fire, we are funded through MHCLG. We have responded requesting that fire authorities, particularly low-funded ones like ourselves, are allowed to increase council tax by £5. You'll recall in previous years district councils have been allowed to do this because of low funding, and last year police authorities, police and crime commissioners were allowed a significant increase on their budgets. The LGA's response across the sector also includes that request that fire authorities can increase their council tax by £5. To put that into context, our band 1% increase in council tax for us is 66p a year on a council tax bill. So what do we spend it all on? Again, this is illustrative to be able to show you that the majority of our spending is fairly fixed. Employee expenses, our frontline fire offer and our back office, but the majority is frontline staff. The small orange blob is capital historic debt and our revenue contribution to supporting our capital programme, our fleet and our buildings. And the other is the sort of everything else, IT costs, for example, business rates and so on. So what might we spend? The budget is a rolling budget. We can't start afresh because we employ people, we own buildings and equipment. So the 1920 budget is always, the previous year's budget is always the starting point. And we amend that for technical changes, things that will happen anyway. There is a very small amount of growth, which I'll talk you through, and we continue to fund capital from revenue. The reason we do that is because it's one-off. If we borrow, it's like a mortgage. We're committing to debt for many, many years. So at the moment, we can still continue to fund capital from revenue. The question of sustainability of being able to do that is wrapped up in the uncertainty. The estate strategy is not part of the budget. That's a separate item on your agenda. And the outcomes and requirements of IRMP and the inspection report are not included in this budget. So really, this is the rest of the day job rolling forward. Key assumptions: pay 2.5%. How right is that? I'm not sure. It's a risk. Capital contribution to support the existing programme is 1.2 million, and I'm proposing a further $500,000, and I'll come on to why that is at the end. A small amount of growth for unavoidable costs, and further contingency for strike action. At a previous meeting, you'll recall we debated what strike cover might look like, and we need to provide the funds for that. So in true accountant form, there's a table showing the starting point being the 36.5 million that we cost, and the impact of those technical changes and contribution to capital, taking our forecast spend to just under 40 million. The growth, proposed growth of 438,000. What's that made up of? The strike cover contract, as I talked about. Revaluation of our buildings has resulted in increased business rates, costs, and the control room staffing budgets. The actual numbers of staff in there and the budget were not aligned, and we need to correct that in the budget. So what do I think the money will look like? We know we've got 1 year only figures. The 75% proposed business rate scheme has been deferred for another year. Will that happen? I'm really not sure. Fair funding review, so how the pot is distributed across the sector, that's still being debated, along with whether fire funding stays with CLG or does it move to the Home Office. I think that's another debate that will happen as part of the spending review. We know in the government's manifesto that there are services favoured in the public sector more than local government and fire, in particular the NHS. And the final point, really, how any growth might be funded. So growth to the NHS has got to come from somewhere. It's either tax rises, cuts to other services, or borrowing beyond fiscal rules. Now, government have already said that they're not going to borrow beyond fiscal rules. So the pessimist in me looks that other government departments will have growth at the expense of other government departments, possibly CLG. So in forecasting where our money comes from, the categories haven't changed. Council tax remains our largest source of income, closely followed by business rates if you add in the top-up grant, and a small amount of RSG. So the magic number is amazingly the same as how much we're spending. And that's not by coincidence. So the forecast spend, 39.5 million, forecast resources. So what I'm saying is, highlighting all the risks that I've said about uncertainty. I don't know what a pay award will look like, and I don't know what some of the decisions government will make will look like. But for what we know now, we balance for next year. That's where the good news ends, I'm afraid. So we've done a couple of scenarios, optimistic and pessimistic. So what might be different? You'll see there the difference on what 21-22 could look like, good and bad. The technical changes really is around pay and pensions. So it's the impact of an increase in the pay award, the impact, obviously, if pay increases, pension costs increase, and we have the whole pension issues across the sector anyway with McLeod and so on. So a small change in any of those, you can see, makes a big difference to us. So that's, again, in resources, I've looked forward to an optimistic and a pessimistic. Council tax, what's the difference? That is, we see a slowdown in the growth of the tax base, so particularly around housing. Further grant cuts. Optimistic, we see a small cut in grant pessimistic, we see that local government and fire take a bigger hit compared to other areas of public spending. And pension compensation grants. So with all the issues arising with pensions, we have been compensated by grant, but we have no assurance that that's going to be a permanent compensation. And I would suspect an easy way of reducing our funding is to start to scale down the amount of compensation grant. So I continue to forecast council tax increases of around 2%. I don't see much change in referendum principles. And I've assumed that if anything changes around business rates, it is neutral to us, and of course it might not be. So on a good day, 21-22 could be manageable, and on a less good day, we could be 1.5 million adrift. And if we go back to one of the original slides, the pie chart, really the only place we have to go is employee expenses. So on reserves, the age-old, well, you've got lots of money set aside and you could just spend that. I mean, the key thing to point out is you can only spend reserves once. We are required to have a general reserve. That is the absolute backstop of something will happen. There will be a cost that we didn't know was going to happen. The general reserve stands at 2.1 million, which is relatively small. Given the discussions we had around strike cover and the cost impact that could have, I am now recommending that the general reserve should be higher. So the budget proposes a small contribution to start to get the level up. The capital fund is fully committed, and I'm going to cover that next, to fund the capital programme, i.e. mainly our fleet. We have the estate strategy reserve, and that's a separate item you'll be talking about. And the management of change reserve. You've got some big issues facing you, IRMP and the inspection report and what we do to improve. That really is there, to fund the one-off costs of dealing with those issues. It cannot fund the ongoing costs. So again, it's a relatively small sum of money and we can only spend it once. So what am I worried about here? We're starting to see that funding capital from revenue is going to be an increase in pressure. It's still the most economically advantageous thing to do because it avoids taking out what's the equivalent of lots of mortgages. There are a number of issues that you'll be talking about: the day crew and plus issue, payroll and pensions administration and pensions themselves, the inspection report and the IRMP, to name but a few. And then national risks. We talk around pay, government cuts, Brexit. Again, what does that mean to fire? Well, just one simple thing like procurement costs. Our fleet are not British vehicles, so we're talking about importing parts to support those vehicles. There's just one simple example. Funding around grant, I've already talked around. McLeod judgment is the pensions issue, the recent judgment, strike action, and of course Grenfell and the outcome of the reports and the requirements of fire authorities going forward. So just briefly on capital programme. You set a capital programme which rolls forward because it covered more than 1 year. What you are simply seeing this time is some relatively small additions to that programme. What we've done is an exercise of saying if it's not absolutely essential, then it's not going in this 1 year programme. So that's the draft capital programme. Only 836,000 of that is new. So most of that, and you'll know that vehicles take a long time to spec, commission, procure and deliver. You don't just go to Fire Engines RS and buy one. So that's why the programme rolls over a number of years. So the new additions being proposed in this budget to the programme are those. And one of those items we may or may not do. We might pause. So fleet is the continued renewal and replacement of our fleet. The conversion of this really underutilised space at HQ is one that we don't have to do now, and I think given uncertainty we may pause. It's the right thing to do, but it may not be the most advantageous to do at the moment. The following three are all IT related, and obviously we must invest and maintain our IT systems. They're essential to the running of the business. And the last item is a contribution to safety sprinkler systems in high-rise buildings for those people with vulnerabilities. So in the revenue budget, we put some more money into capital. The slide you've just seen spends that money that we've just put into capital, leaving us the grand total of only 57,000 to fund capital going forward for next year. So again, this is showing you not only revenue resources being tight, that capital resources are equally as tight. So just to conclude, 2021, if we fairly much stay as we are and stand still, it is manageable just. Huge uncertainty both over our funding, our resources, our spending and the requirements to deliver services. Some big decisions next year around how we continue to fund capital and of course the outcome of the other issues at the bottom of the slide. And there endeth my depressing presentation this morning. I'm happy to take any questions, although the purpose of today really was to give you that oversight for you to be able to ponder on it. I'm more than happy that outside of this meeting, if you want to have any conversations or questions with myself or Rick, and we'll be thoroughly debating this in February.
Well, so thanks for that, Alison. As you said, it's your best estimate of where we are and where we're likely to be. As we've said in other places, it's a bit of crystal ball gazing really at the moment. As you notice in the press when we were criticised for the report, I did say if they want a 4-star service, they've got to give us 4-star money, and this again accentuates that point. A couple of small points, Rick and Alison. We should try and turn what you've said into a shortish briefing note for members of Parliament, if you can. I mean, they all say they're super intelligent and have got loads of time, but I find if you stick to one side of A4, they might read it. So if we could get something to them. And then the other thing, Rick, as you know, we've got 1 new member in the city and 3 new members in the county. I think you should formally write to them and ask them if they'd like to come in and have a chat with you and your team, so we get them on side, because they some of them are very new, some of them have only just arrived in Leicestershire, so I think it'd be well advantageous to get them in. And then the final one, just for my 2 penneth, on the HQ space, I know it's relatively expensive to do it, but politically, with a small p and a big P, it would benefit us if we could say that we know we built it big, we had loads more money a long time ago, but we still have got that empty space. If we could convert it, we could then all of us say to members of the public, okay, we knew we built it when money wasn't a problem, but now it is all occupied, because when you speak to the press, they like the fact that, you know, we've got ambulance people in there and all that sort of stuff. So, but unfortunately, we've got that huge kitchen in there, and if anybody's been up to the top and seen it, while we've got all that in there, we just cannot even market it, let alone let it. I understand about the 250,000 to do it, but I'd like it done if we get slack to do it, for political reasons, for you as a service and for us as elected members, that we could say we've dealt with the problem and it's occupied. Right, I'll take questions now to Alison. So you're first, James.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just something you talked about towards the beginning of the presentation, really, about how police services, police and crime commissioners aren't limited to the same level of increase, the maximum level of increase that we are. I was just wondering, if we had the same upper limit as a police and crime commissioner, how much extra would that raise for ourselves?
Actually, this year, CLG have not set a referendum principal limit for PCCs. It was absent from the settlement, so I'm awaiting that with great interest. Last year, now the figure is going to be off the top of my head, but it was a lot. It was £24. So when I talk to you, around £5 raising us 3 million or so, yeah, yeah, we would be.
That might be something to mention to the MPs.
But it was certainly in the Chair's consultation response about having greater flexibility than 2%.
Councillor Govind.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question relates on that following from Mr. Pollard. I know last year the PCC raised £24. This year, or this financial year, PCC is going to raise between 2 and 4%. My understanding is. But the question I'm asking, £5 figure that you have mentioned in your presentation, that will be on top of whatever the rise the PCC raise at their annual budget meeting. And would that be on top of our the frontline service, whether it is city or county? Would that be additional to that, or within that category of rises that's going to come along?
Of course, fire is a preceptor, so in the county districts and the county set their own levels of council tax. In the city, obviously, it's just one. On top of that is fire and police. So we set our own, and they're all added together. So in the county, it's districts, county, sometimes parishes, police, fire, and the whole thing is rolled up into your council tax bill. So theirs is very separate, but obviously at the moment we're not allowed to do £5, we're only allowed to do 2%.
Okay, Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Yes. While I tend to agree with you about the kitchen, I'd like to see a business case for that. I mean, have we got any potential renter for it? And if so, what are they prepared to pay for it? I think before we start thinking about spending money, we need to know, have we got a customer to use it? And if so, how much they're prepared to pay? And get a business plan for that. And then we could perhaps argue the case for it. But at the minute, it's money that we don't have to spend. Give me a business case for it, then I'll consider it. But at the minute, I agree with you, but I can't support it. We've got no evidence.
Sure. We know it's 250,000. We don't know if we've got a client or not. Can you answer? Have we got any potential clients, Rick? Alison?
I think it's one of those chicken and egg, because actually to have the space to market, people want to see the space. So I think that we have had interested parties. One of the problems you have with a building like HQ is the whole security and sensitivity and access, which so public sector partners are probably the likely ones.
Question, Chair. It's a limited market. We can actually rent it to. And now they're prepared to pay that amount of money for it that it will cost.
I think it's a very good point, and I'm quite happy that we look at the business case and bring something, but I'll certainly circulate something to members.
Jeffrey?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the kitchen space, I must repeat my concerns that I've brought up previously. Get a new tenant in there. I don't know how many employees one would expect to put in what is now the kitchen space, but parking space there is at a premium at the moment, as I realise when I come along to these meetings which are there. If you get another tenant in and you have people working in what is now the kitchen space, where are they going to park?
I was going to say that's a question to someone who works in the city centre. We don't have parking in the city centre. Yeah, I mean, there's a park and ride across the road. So one is there's a good public transport link, and the other is the park and ride is owned by the city and the county. So actually, if there's a negotiation to be had about some spaces, it's literally across the road.
It's just that in the city, you have reasonable transport. Everything goes into the city. To get out there, it would be more difficult. So I would assume you would have to be letting it without the use of car parking spaces for the employees, no?
There's limited in the car park in front of HQ, but as I said, there's the park and ride over the road where we might be able to look at an arrangement where we allocate some park and ride spaces. It's a big site.
Sue, you're next.
Yeah, I made a few points. First of all, obviously, looking at the entire budget, it is disappointing that we are not given adequate funding by central government. Obviously, the safety of the public should be paramount, and also treating our staff fairly as well needs to be paramount because of the need to retain the trained staff that we have. And it's absolutely shameful that government seems to be disregarding what is an essential public service, and it's something that we really need to be getting that message over to the public, that it's not like it's bad weather. These are deliberate decisions which are made centrally by the government. Coming back to that report, there were some things in there, because people have been talking about the kitchen space. I'll look at that first, and I think Mr. Bolter mentioned that it's important to be looking at who might use it. One of the things that I thought of, instead of looking at spending that money as an expense, is the possibility of it being an investment. But as Mr. Bolter said, we need to know who a possible user of that space might be. I don't see that having things in it already is a particular disadvantage, because we wouldn't want to modify it and then have somebody come in and we've not done it to their specifications. If someone else is going to use it, they need to be involved in what those modifications are, so that it's done to first fix to their requirements once we know that we can actually generate income from it. Another thing which I saw on one of the slides which surprised me was to do with, as I understood what was said, that we will be contributing towards the cost of sprinkler systems in high-rise. I would have thought that was a landlord's responsibility, so I'm not sure why we would see the need to pay for that. If they're refurbishing buildings and not doing it adequately, then I think it's something that the landlords should be funding rather than the fire authority. The other thing was questions about borrowing. I know Alison did talk about that, but looking at the comparison of, are we spending money that we need for other purposes on capital projects, so capitalising that revenue at a time when interest rates are very, very low, where it might actually be financially advantageous to invest through borrowing. I know we don't want the bother of having a debt, and I know that we're very proud that we are debt-free, but in the long term, if it was at a fixed low interest rate, would that actually work out to our advantage? I don't know, that's why I'm asking that question. Thank you.
Reasonable questions. Rick will answer the funding versus safety, because I think we're still safe even though we're badly funded. And then Alison will answer the questions about borrowing, and the sprinklers in high-rise will be down to Rick, I'd imagine. And then you've got another one about staff retention, which I presume will be Rick.
Thank you, Chairman. I think they're difficult questions, because what the Treasurer is proposing is there aren't any cuts being suggested in that proposition, just to make members aware that if the uncertainty proceeds beyond 2021, the pressures that we can reasonably foresee will mean that there will have to be consideration on how we make those savings. And we're not doing that yet, because, of course, Treasurer identified 70% of our costs come through workforce and workforce costs. So that's a future one that maybe we'll have to deal with, but hopefully we can avoid. And we've been very prudent over the last few years to be able to avoid those. The issue
you can reassure Councillor Barton that we are safe, even though we are badly funded. I think that's important we get that on the record.
Well, I think the interesting part about SAFE is the item, agenda item 11, which is the RMP. The RMP is my recommendation to members under our duty under legislation to put forward a fire and rescue service that meets the reasonable needs and foreseeable risks that the residents of LLR face. And of course, we're considering that in February for a final agreement, but that has to, and unfortunately, sometimes government doesn't look at the constraints. That has to be done within a financial envelope, as the Treasurer has just given you. So whilst I may not want to work within a budget, I have to. Trying to go back to the last issue on sprinklers, I think it's really important that members give consideration to vulnerability. And we use the word vulnerability because, of course, it affects all of our particular communities. The money is put there not to fund sprinklers as a per se, because I agree with Councillor Barton that landlords should be responsible. But what we have across our LLR region is vulnerability in very sort of small pockets where we have perhaps local authorities, district councils, even health providers who have particular vulnerability where they may have some money but they possibly don't really want to spend it, or we may see vulnerability, and we've seen it even in the city where unfortunately we've had fire deaths from emollient creams and such like, where a misting system that might be portable for a short period of time could be utilised. Now, we don't have that provision to be able to say to someone, well, if you're going to put some money up, we can match fund it, we can assist you. Clearly, we wait for the outturn of Grenfell. Grenfell may require certain property owners to retrofit sprinkler systems in, and of course we certainly would want to do that. But I think the money is there to enable us to react to Grenfell and to also meet the vulnerability of individual communities should they come forward. It's a very small amount of money, so please, although it's £50,000, it may not seem, it won't provide a huge amount of support, but I think it's the showing the right commitment to the vulnerable people in LLR. In terms of staff retention, I think there are a number of issues that don't help us. None of them are in our control. The decision made by government a few years ago to move staff into a different pension scheme led us to the last dispute. And of course, that was avoidable, clearly, on the judgment that's just gone through and the announcements made last year. We're still awaiting the outturn of the December the 18th decision on the McLeod judgment as to what that means. Now, from my assessment of what will happen going forward, is there are members of staff who thought they could retire when they joined aged X. The pension scheme changed, which moved their pensionable service to an extended period to get them a similar sort of financial position, not the same. But it was a decline. They now hopefully will return them to what they thought they were going to get, and I think some of them may make a decision that the money that's now in their pocket or potentially in their pocket, they'll take and they'll leave. And that's not in our control, and unless we're going to incentivise people to save, I think you can see across the whole of the sector, and it's not just the fire sector, the whole of the public sector, issues around pension change that has led to a loss of knowledge and understanding.
Thank you. And Alison, borrowing versus capitalising.
Councillor Barton, you're quite right, interest rates are low, although borrowing from the Treasury, they decided to put the rate up to encourage us not to borrow from the Treasury. But as you'll see in the budget presentation I did, the contribution to capital is one-off, that pays for our capital, it's done. As soon as we borrow, if it's for a building, that can be 25 to 50 years of debt. For a vehicle, the debt is actually a lot higher because it's a shorter lifespan. So to borrow for an appliance is something like 10 years. And as soon as you borrow, then that is your commitment to your revenue budget for the next 10 years, as opposed to the one-off chunk that we put in to pay for the equipment now. But I think the forecast I've put in for 21-22 is there is no scope for that chunk of contribution to fund capital. That really worries me because it is the equivalent of buying a car because you've saved for it, or hire purchasing and having that debt for a number of years. So while we can, I'd still strongly recommend that we fund capital from our own resources. But of course, if we do have to borrow next year, I don't foresee a massive change in interest rates, and the only saving grace is borrowing is as cheap as it's been for a long time.
Yes, Sue, fine. Before we do it again, Sue, have we got anybody else not to speak? And we'll take seconds. Okay, Sue, then we'll do you, then we'll finish.
Mine was just to thank the people for their thoughtful answers, and also just a response to Alison's comment on the borrowing. Obviously, I would differentiate between borrowing to pay for a depreciating asset rather than a capital asset which appreciates in value, which is a sound investment. And I think those are things that when you're looking at borrowing, we need to be looking at. I appreciate that most of the things borrowing is for is equipment, which is depreciating rather than actually adding to the net worth of the authority.
Point taken. All happy to receive the report then? Good, thank you. Shall we move on then now to the external audit report? You're going to do this, aren't you, Alison? It's on pages 21 to 42. agenda item 9. Alison?
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall towards the end of last year we had a difficult audit and an extended audit, and there were a number of reasons for that, both new auditors and our own internal performance. This is really a procedural item to say the annual audit letter, the audit was complete, the audit letter issued, we had an unqualified, which is the desired outcome opinion. The letter does set out the items we really discussed before around we need to improve, and I agreed to bring a short report to your next meeting just to tell you where we are on that improvement plan.
Great. Personally, I thought the actual auditors were very, very good. They gave a good presentation and they highlighted some things which we hadn't done. So in terms of them paying them the extra £8,000, I think they were definitely worth it. Betty?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very quick question under page 31, where it is actually said that there was missing disclosures, etc. But the real thing that I was concerned about was they said they did not demonstrate an understanding of how the pension figures should be reflected in the financial statement. I just wonder whether or not that has been rectified and whether that level of expertise is now there. Thank you, Chair.
Alison?
It was a good point by the auditors, and yes, we've got resources in place. In fact, my chief accountant, who's sitting in the gallery there, is leading on the improvement to the production of the accounts.
Very good. Bill?
Thank you, Chair. On page 37, the bottom of the page, pleased to hear that you've got an action plan coming forward to rectify these things. It's regrettable we are where we are, but your comment was quite right in the paper that if you want a gold-plated service, then give us the money. So for once I agree with the Chair. But so the action plan is coming forward, but have we got any recompense against the previous auditor who perhaps was a little lax and they did their figures shown up by the present auditor? Because it seems to me strange that all these things are audited and then suddenly somebody finds fault with the previous one. Is there any recompense for that at all?
I doubt it, but Alison will tell you the truth.
The Chair's right, but auditors, like most local authorities, fire and some police, signed up to the public sector auditor appointments, which was sort of a carryover from the old audit commission, so that we awarded and appointed auditors across the country, and it was done on a national basis. So PSAA managed the contracts with auditors, and following our audit reporting issues I have written to PSAA to say some of these issues are our fault, our issues and our shortcomings, and some of these is because of previous poor quality audits. I'm sure they will take them up, our previous auditors, KPMG, but of course KPMG didn't win any contracts across the whole sector, so they are now not auditors in the public sector, which will probably be an issue. But yeah, the short answer is yes, I have taken it up with the contract managers.
Okay, recommendations that the CFA notes the external audit annual letter 2/18/19. I'll move it. All happy? Super. That's number 9. I'm on 10. I've just got to find it. 10. Oh, Training Facility Service Leadership and Development Centre Project Update, 43 to 64. Matthew Wallace from City Council's here, and he's going to introduce it. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. As the Chair said, Matt Wallace from Leicester City Council, working on behalf of the Combined Fire Authority and Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service. So, back in July 2019, we presented the estate strategy, which talked around consolidating support services for the Fire Authority going forward. And then in September of last year, we presented the Leadership and Development Training Centre scheme, where we went through and explored different options and agreed to continue and develop the design of the facility. We've got the slides up. Cheers, Anna. Thank you very much. And so when we were talking around the design and development of the facility, we agreed in September's CFA that we'd go off and continue to utilise the City Council property services to explore further and work up the design development. We'd continue to support the existing services that are split across the various sites at the moment to make sure we've got resilience in the service whilst we're going through this investigation. And then thirdly, make sure that we've got contingency plans if some of the existing facilities do fall over in the meantime. So really what I wanted to do today was just go through a work in progress update of how we've got on since September in terms of working up the scheme development and where we're going in terms of current options around sites. So a bit of site optioneering. As you can see there, what we're going to talk around is the current situation of the leadership and development scheme and the facilities. And we'll talk briefly about proposed sites that we're currently looking at. We'll then move into site costs and give a broad overview of the moving feast that is site costs at the moment, and these are at the highest level at the minute. And then we'll talk around a case study where we've been out and actually looked at a similar sort of facility to give us some confidence around what we're going to be designing, whether it's going to be fit for purpose for the operation itself, and then move on to recommendations as well. So in terms of the current situation, what we've identified is 5 sites that we've shortlisted to sort of investigate further. We've also been through and we've visited the Derbyshire facility, which is Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, and we've also had a meeting and a demonstration with Caterpillar, which is a site where we're currently doing some of the carbonaceous burning. Just to put it into context at the moment, the leadership and development functions themselves are spread over 6 sites in total. That's Central Fire Station, Loughborough, Shepshed, Southern, Kendrew out in Rutland, and Caterpillar site in Desford. And I'm sure you all appreciate that sort of duplicates, triplicates the management and issues with staff. We've only got 1 BA and rescue and extrication teams on the site, and that thwarts the ability to have sort of joined up thinking and causes some inefficient working. It also makes it difficult to actually have effective communication over the desk between the different training functions. So we've picked up various lessons learned from the service operation, which I don't need to go into in great detail, but just to sort of pick out some of the bits that we do across the various sites. At Caterpillar, we've obviously got some constraints there. We've got a restriction on burns per year. So we've got a restriction of 80 burns per year over at Caterpillar. These are done Tuesdays, Thursdays and some Saturdays, and we've got restricted burn times as well. So there's some constraints around the site. There's constant issues as well with us not owning the site at the moment. So we're on an informal agreement at the moment, so we need to probably reduce the risk around the actual site of Caterpillar. And then we've also got surrounding extension to the contract around the contract and the burns licences. In terms of Loughborough, we've got a fire training unit there. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with it, but it's the large black fire training unit that's used extensively, and it's at its end of its economic life expectancy. We've talked about that at previous CFAs. I mean, the main through route from Loughborough, it's close proximity to houses, which obviously causes some of the issues with use of carbonaceous burns there, due to the unburnt products and the combustion of gases being released into the atmosphere. So there's constraints around that site as well. It's got improved conditions though for crews, and we can use it for tactical ventilation, etc. as well. So we have got some benefits of that site as well. We need to sort of factor in. We've also got a small apron at Loughborough, the Loughborough Fire Training Centre, and that's where we use it for road traffic collision training as well. Obviously, there's some conflicts there with using it for the road traffic accident training and using the FTU at the same sort of time, so there is some conflicts around that. So you can see that we're working on quite constrained sites at the moment as well. We do rope access rescue, safe working at height, carried out over at Southern Station, as well as at the FTU. And we also have some constraints around the use of water on some of these sites as well. So that's just some of the existing existing constraints that we're having to factor in to the design development, what we're looking at using going forward for the proposed sites. So when we're talking around proposed sites, we've got 5 at the moment that I'm going to talk briefly through. And again, as I say, this is work in progress. So these are all real high level, and this is a short list, but there's still a lot of the journey to go before we're actually really distilling down into a confirmed site. So if we just talk briefly about Lutterworth site, that's located just off the A34303 in Lutterworth. Its strengths are it's a suitable site. It's approximately 4.5 acres in site available to us, and it's got a great proximity to sort of arterial routes to get in and out, so it's got some real good strengths to it. Some of the constraints that we need to bear in mind with that site is its proximity to residents, so housing, and also it's likely to require development fees, which when and if we build out on that site, which would probably approximate out to about 12.5% on top of the construction value of the development. So that's something we just have to bear in mind when we're considering that option. The Quorn/Barrow-upon-Soar site, which is just off the A46 there, has got some strengths around it. Again, it's a suitable size site. It's around 4.5 acres, and again, it's got quite good proximity to the arterial routes in and out. Some of the constraints that we have to bear in mind with that site, of course, are it's situated on floodplain. So obviously we need to consider any remediation costs of locating any facilities there, and they won't be known at this stage until we do much more in-depth geotechnical and topographical inspections around the design and develop the design out further. So there's quite a bit of cost risk in the ground circulating around the floods of that particular site. The other thing to bear in mind with the Quorn/Barrow option as well is just by the model that we'd probably use to develop that site out, we would use a developer to lead the overall development of that, which would probably incur around 12.5% of the construction value in terms of build out. Both of those sites are owned by the county, and as Chair identified, obviously that's something that we've sort of let people know before the start of this meeting. In terms of the Beaumont Lee site, this is the Beaumont Lee site, which is near the shopping centre, directly adjacent to the local policing unit. It's it's suitable in terms of its size. We've got about 7.5 acres we could potentially play with there, so it has got a lot of space there. And again, its proximity to the major arterial routes is really good. We do note that there is a one public estate opportunity with that site as well, and it gives us some opportunities to sort of relocate other options which are in the wider estate strategy around operational fire stations if we potentially move down that route. So it does give us some wider opportunities, and at the moment, with the way that we try and develop that site out, we probably would not. We would probably act as the master developer, so we wouldn't incur the 12.5% approximate fee that a developer would charge when sort of on the construction value to develop it out. There are some constraints with that site though that we need to make the CFA aware of. Obviously, if we were going to merge it and relocate Western Fire Station, this would cause an additional 4-minute response time to the integrated risk management plan. Significant thing, and I know it's on the item on the agenda that Rick will pick up later. We need to consider that as pretty much black and white unacceptable. And we also know that the ground conditions there, it is contaminated land up at Beaumont Lees. It's remediated land. So again, we've got risk in the ground that we need to investigate far more thoroughly to determine what the actual costs of that would be to remediate and develop on that land. And the other area to consider with Beaumont Lees is if there wasn't the wider opportunity to bring in the operational Western Fire Station into the development, it wouldn't actually the value of the development wouldn't be offset by a potential £2 million regeneration of Western Fire Station. So we lose the opportunity cost circulated around that, which results basically in the actual leadership and development centre being quite a bit more expensive as a standalone unit. and potentially unviable. And we'll look at costs in a moment when we talk around that. Just moving on to Desford, which is the Caterpillar site over at Desford. Again, we've got a lot of space there that we can play with, so we've got around 4.5 acres that we're talking to them about at the moment. There is potential to include a full suite of training facilities there, so you could include off-road, driver off-road training, water training, etc. And obviously there's sort of opportunities as well for Desford and Nova, who are the landlords of the site, to have a bit of corporate social responsibility there. So there's an opportunity for them to sort of welcome the fire authority onto their site as part of their wider corporate social responsibilities as a larger employer in Leicestershire. And again, with this scheme at the moment, the way that we're looking at it, we think the procurement model that we're going to be going, should we take this scheme further, would be that the fire authority, the city and county working together to act as master developer. Therefore, we wouldn't incur an external developer's fee of around 12.5%, as said before. Just to sort of manage people's expectations, this option requires extensive negotiations. We're talking with an external provider there. We've got a large area of land that we need to negotiate some sort of freehold acquisition or some sort of long leasehold transaction that's going to give us the confidence to develop out on that site. So there's a large negotiation that we're only at the real front end of on that one. And also we need to sort of bear in mind that it does rely on a lot of goodwill and really playing on that corporate social responsibility element as well. So just touching on finally the Loughborough option, which is of course the main sort of area that serves the training for the fire authority at the moment. So its strengths are that we are able to expand and refurbish the existing leadership and development facilities. So there is a cost saving in extending rather than complete new build on that, which is obviously a big benefit to us. And also there is the ability to phase the work and deliver a new fire behaviour unit more quickly to the scheme as well. And so by carefully phasing the work, we could keep the existing fire training unit working and develop the fire behavioural unit on a separate part of the site to enable like a straight transfer and a crossover. So there'd be no downtime where we have to take that service away from the city and county and to another provider. And another benefit to it is obviously that it's going to be a shorter programme by using that site as well. We're obviously at the moment just working within the constraints of the Loughborough site, so there's no land acquisition elements to negotiate. The bigger opportunity, of course, with that site is if we do look at land assembly, and by that I mean the neighbouring properties as well. You'll notice on the slide it talks around the land that EMAS have, which is directly adjacent to the fire training centre. Western Power Distribution, again, they've got a small depot there, and the County Council have also got a parcel of land there as a depot that's currently occupied and in use. So, crystal ball gazing, the opportunity to assemble those sites all together and make a more comprehensive scheme is really quite compelling. But again, it's really quite complicated to get to those negotiations. They'll take time, and it is a moving feast. We get emails on a daily basis with regards to how that's going or not going well in terms of negotiation. Should we take questions at the end, or? Yeah. That's okay, no worries. So when we're going through those 5 areas, I think everybody that's read the report will see that we're focusing down on sort of taking further and doing some more detail around two of these sites, and that being the Desford Caterpillar site, which does offer that greater opportunity in terms of a wide space, but then also noting the financial constraints that we're working with, which I'll touch on and there's a slide on in a minute. Loughborough also provides a slightly compromised scheme, but actually a scheme that will be really a game changer in terms of what they're currently offering across those 6 sites. And again, as said, I think the Loughborough option needs further investigation still, as well as the Desford one, in terms of design development, negotiations, just to see how far we can take these options further. And that's not saying that ultimately, whilst we've got 6 sites, do we all put it and consolidate it onto one site, or is the emerging considerations to say, well, is there a hybrid model there that benefits and takes the risks out of some of the sites and puts them into another site? Again, reducing it from the 6 sites that currently operate training and learning in leadership and development from, but moves it into fewer sites, consolidating it. Now, in terms of site costs, this is high-level site costs that my project manager, Sam, who's sitting in the gallery today, has built for us, just to give us an early indication of the order of merit in terms of cost. And you'll have noticed in the earlier item today where the Treasurer talked around estate strategy costs and estates reserves being around 6 million. You'll notice when you go over to the furthest right-hand side column, the numbers exceed that 6 million. So we do need to take that into consideration, that this is not a cheap solution. It's a solution that's going to deliver better value for the future, though, in terms of a comprehensive and a modern leadership and development centre suitable for 21st century firefighting. The other thing to bear in mind with these options is, whilst the bottom 2 look far better value, you will note that at the moment the land acquisition cost there we've currently got marked as unknown, and that is because whilst I can put an existing use and a market value on those sites, it's theirs to sell, and it's part of the negotiation. And whilst I've got a value that I've got in the back of my mind, that's part of the negotiation process to get there, and I'd be reluctant to give too much detail on that for this time being. But really, from this slide, what I wanted to do was just articulate that whilst this is over the initial amount of budget we've got in the reserves for estate strategy, there is options to consider as we go forward, and as part of the continuation that we're doing and the ongoing due diligence that we're doing around this overall scheme, we'd hope to refine those costs, and as part of the due diligence be able to demonstrate that actually as part of this process we've come with the best value solution, and that's part and parcel with keep on repeating and taking this through the CFA to give you a picture of how these options are developing and materialising over a period of time. So as I said in the introduction, what the project manager and the wider team have done has gone out and looked at a similar comparable leadership and development centre over at Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, and they've took that opportunity. It's a project that was took 2 years in development, and it was 1 year in construction. So that gives us an idea of a similar sort of comparable kind of programme that we'd be working to once we've determined what site and where the funding's coming from. In terms of the construction costs, they were looking at around circa 7 million. So again, that's comparable to what we're stating in our current cost planning at the moment. But when you've added everything in total client side costs, stat compliance costs, etc., you'd be looking around 10 million as an overall budget. But again, they've talked around including a reduced land value for 5 acres, so 500k for 5 acres is considerably below market value. Those people who sort of understand that element, and that's partially down to it being owned by the police and it being let as a joint development, so a real partnership working on that side of things. In terms of doing the schedule of accommodation, what Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service are looking in terms of their facility and what Derbyshire have done, square meterage, the schedule of accommodation is really comparable. So what that does, it gives us confidence that actually we're not looking for Rolls Royce here. We're actually looking for something that is a leading facility, but we're not going over the top in terms of the design development. This is sensible and measured in terms of its specifications. And one other thing to bear in mind is this is a containerised fire behavioural unit over at Derbyshire, which isn't the ideal solution that Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service were looking at, but it met the requirement of Derbyshire. So that would be probably a specification difference that you'd probably find with Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Services to the Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service option. A really useful exercise to be able to have one of our neighbouring counties, though, to be able to sort of do that evaluation and determine exactly whether our schedule of accommodation is fit for purpose or not. So in terms of we go. Yeah. So in terms of recommendations, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, this is more around noting progress to date and noting the reports within the appended documentation. It's more around really CFA noting around the REBA Stage 2 design development. So this is taking the design further whilst we're looking to find an optimised design, but also locate that right location for this facility, and also for the CFA to note that the next update with regards to the Leadership and Development Centre, we would like to bring something with a fully designed up REBA Stage 2 design to the CFA in the summer period. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions now.
Matthew, very inclusive. So I've got Jeffrey, then I've got Betty, then I've got James.
Chair, for the benefit of the minutes, I'm going to be a little controversial. I have mentioned this before, but today in the presentation we were talking about a hybrid model that may come out of this. Has anybody considered a hybrid model where we can join together with Derbyshire for some of the things that we want? Because we've had it before I came here on the authority. We've got Rolls-Royce facilities and then turned out that we haven't needed them. A kitchen proves it. And I just wondered whether we ought not have a look at an option to see whether we can combine with Derbyshire. I don't know where in Derbyshire they're building it, whether it's right the north or somewhere near here, but have we ought to look at it as part of the options?
Chairman, if I answer that question, Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service headquarters in Ripley, so it's a long way up the M1. And of course, what we're having to do, before we looked at this particular project, we looked at how we might farm some of our training requirements to neighbouring authorities, including Derbyshire, Lincolnshire, Northants, Warwickshire, etc. Clearly we have difficulties because a number of our employees are part-time workers who we have to give the same level of provision as we do our whole-time workforce. We did some cost modelling probably 2 years ago that said if we couldn't provide our own facility and we had to farm everybody out, how much would that cost us in additional training allowances, fees, salary, etc. And that put a huge increase on our revenue costs. And as you saw with the earlier presentation, those sort of things aren't really sustainable in the current environment.
Thank you. Betty, you were next.
Yes, it's about the Loughborough station. The Epinal Way separates the station from the hospital. My ward is at the side of the hospital, so it doesn't really have an impact on me, but it does have an impact on the council housing and other housings that surrounds it. Now, I know it's Councillor Max Hunt's the county councillor there, and I know from past experience in talking to him that there are also problems with neighbours when new initiatives are brought in, and I just wonder whether or not there could be a public relations exercise going on there with the locals to help reassure them that it won't have that much impact on the quality of their life. Thank you.
It would certainly need that if they decided to proceed with it. Matthew?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. In terms of that side of it, at the appropriate time, we'd absolutely be going into full stakeholder consultation with local residents. I think we mentioned it earlier on that we're acutely aware of the residential, the proximity of the residents in the vicinity of where the FTU is at the moment. Now, it is worth mentioning that these new 5 behavioural units are more self-sufficient and give off far less, if not, in fact, nil, in terms of the exhaust fumes that are coming out of the new 5 behavioural units. So there should be a step change improvement with that. But absolutely agree with full stakeholder engagement, a proper consultation, just to explain exactly what we'd be doing once we've identified which site.
Before I call James, can you just elaborate on how you're getting on with that EMAS lot and Western Power? Because they'll both be problematic, they will.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. So at the moment, the conversations with EMAS are ongoing, but are looking like they're very difficult to try and get those to be moved forward. Being perfectly honest, they're not on the same sort of timescales as we are, and yeah. So absolutely. And Western Power, we had some notification within the last 24 hours that the negotiations with Western Power on acquiring their parcel of land is not going well at all. So it looks like, in terms of that land assembly model, we need to really take stock and look carefully at what we could deliver, given the fact that whether we can get those parcels of land assembled when we want to get them, or whether we just have to write those off for now. And that's something it's quite fresh news to us, so we just need to take stock about that. But it's really, really good point.
I thought that would be useful because I knew it. I didn't know if you guys knew it. James?
Thank you, Chair. It's actually very linked to my question. In terms of the desirability and the feasibility of the Loughborough site, if we didn't get the extra parcels of land, would the site as it exists today, just what we own, still be considered sort of a preferred option? So I guess from your answer, I guess that's looking like a likely scenario in Loughborough. On slightly wider point, again linked to the Loughborough site, one of the thoughts I had is, are we happy that we're future-proofing these sites? It's all well and good meeting our requirements for today, but will they still be able to train the firefighters of 10 or even 20 years from now?
Yeah, two real good points around that. So just touching on the Loughborough site, you could get all the facilities on there. It's a case of cost and actual massing of the site, and I fear that if we actually tried to do something like that, it would fall foul of the planners, it would fall foul of the neighbours that we know we've got some real close consultation to work with. So we've got to be really honest with ourselves and say, it is quite a constrained site to get everything on there. So that builds us into this world of, we've got 6 sites at the moment and we're looking to consolidate onto one. Is there some way, a meaningful way of being able to utilise the provision that we've got around Loughborough and enhance it within the constraints that we've got, but then also maybe consider a hybrid model where we've got potential other things going on one of the other sites that we've got, or a smaller acquisition somewhere else, because obviously the administrative burden on 2 sites is going to be less than the administrative burden on 6 sites. So these are the sort of things we've got to consider. What exactly do we want to do on certain sites versus others? And in terms of future-proofing, absolutely, the FBUs that we're looking at the moment, they're picking up everything in terms of future-proofing. In terms of classroom space, actually, from what we're finding at the moment is, providing they've got good access to sort of internet connections and stuff like that, actually we're sort of reducing the amount of functionality within these rooms, because a lot of things are bring your own device. A lot of the training is more in just open space and flexible use. So sort of traditional classroom space is becoming more open, free space with maybe projectors and things like that. So I think we're addressing the future needs for the fire service with this design development.
You're going to sound more like Desford to me. Sue?
Thank you. I've got 2 points to make. One is to do with Western Fire Station and the excellent response times it has from its current location, both towards the city centre where it has easy access and serving some of our outer estates within the city. But it also, there's a social value to it as well. It's often the base for community activities. The People's Zone is launched from there and puts on work in collaboration with local police in an area which has been disproportionately affected by cuts, I would argue. And I think it's an important presence in that community now, since the police station has gone and so on from there, and council offices are no longer situated there. And the firefighters and other staff that work there do get involved in community activities and play an important role within that area. So I would be not recommend removing that facility from there and losing the goodwill of those communities that we already have. The other question is back to the financial aspects. People have talked about whether or not it would be cost effective to send some of our trainees or people to courses outside the area in neighbouring counties and authorities. Could the reverse be true? If we invest in a good facility, would people from outside Leicestershire's and Rutland area want to come and spend money or share the costs to use our facility? Could it be something which would generate future income?
If I take it the two parts, I can do both of those, but I'll do it in reverse order if I can. I think it's a really valid point. If we had a facility that was suitable, would other people come? I think because of our geographical location, of course, that's possible. There are a number of services around the country that have trading arms, and many of their trading arms are on training and training provision, and they provide very specialised training provisions around the country, which some services utilise. But the market is very narrow. It's fire service to fire service. Of course, if we build a provision that is modern, current and up to date, and their own current facilities are due for replacement, then of course that opportunity for us to take new business improves. But we are not looking at that model. That is not our business case. Our business case is to build something that's sufficient for our own staff to meet our own needs. So I think it's a really valid point. It's not like the earlier conversations we had about a business case for conversion of space. This is about what our organisation needs to go forward. In terms of the second one, of course, the location of fire stations is a recommendation that I make to the Fire Authority under the IRMP, and my considerations to that are response capabilities. Clearly, a lot of the work that firefighters do on a day-to-day basis are not urgent in terms of response and just emergencies. So they can locate from different areas, but of course, as Matt said in his presentation, part of the consideration for the Beaumont Leys site was its impact to our response capability, and we recognise that it adds extra time, and it's certainly something that would mean the combination of those two sites onto one would not be a preferred option.
You mentioned the extra 4 minutes, which I thought was ruled out the Beaumont Leys just on the 4 minutes. Coinder?
Thank you, Chair. Just some clarity on my thoughts on how this has been costed up in the table. So we've got 5 sites here, and if we look at the top two, they're sort of coming at £11.5 million total project, and then you've got 10 million. So if you look at the bottom one, Loughborough, which is 5.8 million, that, you know, on a purely numbers basis, that looks very, very attractive, especially in the era that we live, where finances are tight. I'd be far more comfortable putting a figure into the land acquisition. I know it's not land we've got to buy, but if you work it on the basis of £500,000 for an acre of land, which takes the top 3 to 2 million, we are tying property that we own into a project. And I'd be far more comfortable if that somewhere was reflected in that table. Otherwise, it's totally skewed for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. He said he was loath to put it in because he doesn't want to divulge it to the market when he's got to negotiate with EMAS and
Correct.
Western Power. But you could conceivably put those figures in as a ballpark figure. I think the Loughborough site seems to have more problems than just money myself. But anyway, can I take Councillor Gavin next?
Thank you, Chair. I think partially my question has been asked. And being a not new member, just filling a gap for somebody else. Again, looking at the site point of view and bless you, Alison, looking at the different site and working with the other partners, cities or counties, if I put it like Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, would it not be possible to have just 2 sites or 1 site that we could facilitate all the training session, everything in that context? Yeah, that's looking at the budget point of view. You know, we're trying to save money from here and there and everywhere else, but you know, by the time you end up negotiating and the deal and everything is done, it's going to go beyond 11.5 million pounds. And looking at total figure, we'll be saving quite a lot in that sense. So that's my question to you.
If I can answer that on behalf of Matt, I think the proposal would be a really sensible one if we were all working to the same timeline. Clearly, Derbyshire have spent £7 million plus on their new location. I don't suppose they would be ready to give that up to relocate to something between the three services, but we certainly have conversations with the chief officers in the region about trying to share facilities and where a sort of controlled relationship for ongoing service delivery is possible. I know there aren't any other services at the moment that are looking for new training facilities other than us, and certainly not ones that are close enough to the county border for us to make it a workable solution.
Thank you. Aminur?
I'm just seeing the chart, 11 million and 5 million difference in making Loughborough and Lutterworth. And I'm just asking another question. Are you getting any funding from the central government to build the construction? Thank you.
Yeah, easy answer, no. Again, it is one of our requests, though, in the response to the consultation, is not only to give us more money or certainly to make more funding available to support our ongoing revenue budget, is the fact that fire doesn't get any form of capital contribution, no capital grant or borrowing approval. So to invest in buildings and fleet and appliances, we need some capital funding as well.
It's really difficult because they don't give us any capital, yet they cap our revenue. So if we can borrow, but we can't fund it. So we've got some recommendations here. I think the Shep Shed one sounds a little bit iffy, and we're probably slightly sceptical of that. But are we happy to move ahead with the recommendations, which are on your paper? So if I formally move them, will you second them? Okay. Are we all happy with those? And you'll note that we're sceptical about your Loughborough problems because of where it is, not the fact that you can't do it. Okay, so let's move on then. So the next one is 11 IRMP, 65 to 78 on your agenda. Rick's going to do it. We've got a presentation, have we, Rick?
Not at this session, Chairman, no.
Oh. Okay, over to you then, Rick.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the paper in front of you identifies that the purpose of the report is to give you a high-level feedback from the completion of the public consultation that we've recently held. I've asked our planning manager, Chris Moyer, to be present today, and you'll see that he's replaced Alison very neatly because he's been, and I'm asking him here to go through the detail of the appendix because he's been heavily involved with the County Council who have coordinated our responses on a weekly basis. So every single week, as we've had information and responses through, Chris has been working with them to see if we're reaching out in the appropriate way and adjusting what we've done. Clearly, we will get the formal consultation, or you will get the formal consultation for the meeting in February. The purpose of this meeting is to give you a flavour so that you can consider any further questions that you might have for that meeting. There are a number of independencies linked with decisions that the CFA will make around the RMP in the February meeting, and I hope that following today's paper and the urgent item that the Chairman has accepted and you've accepted today, you'll be able to ask me questions, and I'll be able to give you information for you to consider so that when we come back in February, you're able to actually be fully informed about the decisions that you're going to be asked to be made. I'll hand over to Chris. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, yours.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Just thought it'd be useful to say I'll just run through and summarise the report and obviously take any questions at the end. Just a bit of an introduction. Obviously, we have a legal duty to have an IRMP. The current IRMP, which was called the Towards 2020 IRMP, clearly is coming to an end, and the one that we're talking about today is the IRMP from 2020 to 2024. It's part of the Fire and Rescue National Framework. We have to have one in place, and it must cover at least a 3-year time period, be regularly reviewed, reflect local risk, and be developed through consultation and be accessible and cost effective. Just as a background to this, work started on it back in January. 2 current members of the Combined Fire Authority have been involved in the project to deliver this. So thanks go to Councillor Harrison and Councillor Barton, who was heavily involved. So basically went through and to put the IRMP into place, we analyse Historic demand data, we took the last 5-year period to look at that. We also looked at our risk data, station location information, and our response times and currently known budget constraints to analyse all that data and put together a set of proposals. One thing I will point out is that as part of this analysis based on foreseeable demand and risk, we didn't suggest any change in location or the number of stations during the 2020 to 2024 RMP period. The proposals then in the document are those that were agreed by the CFA in June, and those are the 7 proposals that we went out to consultation on.
Page 7. It's page 17.
Sorry, I've not got the pack. Sorry. Just for clarity, we went through then the consultation principles. We believe we've adhered to the gunning principles, which is sort of the obligations that the public body must fulfil, that specify that the consultation should be done at a formative stage when there's still time for change in authority decision, give sufficient information to the public to make an informed response, and provide enough time to formulate and submit responses. And obviously the results of this consultation will be considered in full detail on the 12th of February at the full CFA meeting there. We've engaged with neighbouring fire service, mentioned there as a critical friend to satisfy that the approach we've undertook was robust and appropriate. For the record, that was Lincolnshire that we spoke to, and they provided the comments that are there towards the bottom of page 70. Just moving through on the consultation engagement, this is really just where we try and outline the efforts that we've put in to actually get people to look at the information, digest it, and respond back to the online survey that was out there. So we've estimated that approximately 70,000 individuals, businesses, schools, councils, community and minority groups, etc., have all engaged, have been engaged with the consultation. There's a brief bulleted point breakdown there of how we've engaged with people and the responses we've had via which mechanism. So again, considerable amount through tweets on Facebook, posts on Facebook and tweets through Twitter. But we've also had the social media events and the flyers, etc., that we gave out that have encouraged people to hit our IRMP consultation website. The figure there of 2,235 views of our website, to put that into context, the average length of time somebody stayed on our website looking at those the information provided was over 4 minutes. So it's just to give you an indication that people just didn't hit the site, have a quick look and disappear again. They did sit there and digest some of the information that was provided to them. The 2,900 emails to stakeholders are people like schools, parish councils, community groups, etc. And this is a group of stakeholders that were built up over previous years. The 38 internal presentations were undertaken by senior management. That was 2 to the headquarters at Birstall, and the remaining 36 was where the senior managers went round and visited every station and every watch, so that all the internal personnel were covered and were fully informed on what was happening and the proposals within the IRMP. And then the 6 internal communications were articles in our regular service matters communication method, where we're just keeping people up to date with progress of the IRMP during the 12-week period that it was open for. Just for clarity, we just included some other areas, again, where senior management and middle managers have promoted the IRMP in the period between September and November. We've obviously attended police independent advisory boards for disability, race, LGBT and older people, and just as a snapshot there's a learning disability conference, Safer Communities Strategic Officer Group, etc. And it's just to emphasise the attempt we've made to spread the word, so to speak. Clearly engaged with some partners on the use of their networks and their websites. Again, Leicester City Council, Leicestershire County Council, Rutland County Council, Leicestershire Communities and the Leicestershire Qualities Challenge Group all featured our consultation on their websites. We had people also, trying to be innovative. We had Parish Councils, Equalities Challenge Group and the Leicester Cities Council Face newsletters included consultation information, and we also promoted it at a range there of alternative events, Freshers Week events, station open days, pop-up events at Tarby and Bottisford, even station car washes where we're handing out flyers, and there's 2,500 flyers have been distributed, and again an attempt to spread the word. Just there, then there's the formal confirmation of the formal response received from the County Council, and also the key stakeholders included in there include all the local MPs, elected members, neighbouring fire and rescue services, EMAS, and we did have a formal response from the Fire Brigade Union as well that was also submitted within the consultation period. 2 news releases, and there was, as some of you will have seen, the 2 interviews on Radio Leicester and the interview with East Midlands Today. Moving on to the responses, 282 responses received online, and a number of other mechanisms there. So we mentioned the formal response from the County Council and the FBU. We had other meetings, and we've had freedom of information requests as well to provide additional information. We did, just on the number of the 282, clearly we've engaged with 70,000 people. 282 could be seen to be a small amount. I think that's based on the nature of some of the proposals, but also to put it into some context, in working with the County Councillors who have offered us their expertise and advice throughout this consultation, they confirmed on the basis of the proposals that we've set out that figure was what they probably would have expected to see, and mirrors some of the consultations that the County Council have undertaken themselves. Moving on to what will be page 73 on your pack, we've got just a breakdown of how the respondents heard about the consultation, and again just enforcing the range of efforts that we've made via a range of mechanisms and the responses that were received via those. And then we thought it would be useful to include the consultation costs within the within the report towards the bottom of page 73. Just for clarity, the first 4 bullet points for the £4,900, that was the work that the Leicestershire County Council undertook on our behalf. So creating and hosting this actual survey itself, weekly consultation, progress reports, as Rick mentioned, analysis of the consultation, and creation of a consultation results report. Now that's a deeper dive than you've received today. What we've got today is just a high-level overview. That the consultation results report will be submitted with the formatted version of the paper that you've got to the meeting on the 12th of February. And that takes account of all the free format comments that have been made throughout the consultation. There was over, I believe, 1,200 individual comments made. The County Council have the software to analyse those comments and actually represent them in a more of a detailed response than we're able to. So that was included in the cost of the County Council. The second cost was for the design consultants to go through and create the branding, the proposals document, the paper questionnaire, the publicity posters and flyers, and again the formatting of this report into the branding for the for final publication. Both of those reports will be available after the 12th of February on the website, and we'll include those on the RMP consultation website and communicate those via social media. Just as a note at the bottom of page 73, just a pointer on the amount of work undertaken in relation to this consultation. Really just the effort and the commitment from the senior management, the planning department and the communications team. We've done a rough estimate and we've indicated that there's probably about 1,200 hours of effort devoted to that, in addition to people's other responsibilities. Page 74 has got just a breakdown of the respondent profile in relation to where the responses have come from, and gender and ethnicity within that as well. And moving on to page 75, we've got a breakdown of the responses for each proposal. The first chart that you've presented with isn't in proposal order. You'll see the proposals down the left-hand side. That's in order of those that were strongly agreed with mostly, and that's the order of that first chart. The second chart, well, the charts following that, the next 7 charts, go into more detail in relation to the actual responses received, which ones, the percentages and the number of strongly agree, tend to agree, and a tend to disagree and strongly disagree for each of the 7 proposals that were presented. Just for clarity, on the end of page 77, proposal 7 was the proposals was interpreted in different ways, so we've actually just improved provided a little bit of clarity around that. Lots of people were agreeing with the proposal, other people were strongly disagreeing, but then the comments that were received were slightly misleading, where they were more supportive of the proposal than actually disagreeing with it. And so we just tried to provide a brief summary of that on the bottom of page 77 there. But as I say, the full details around the comments and a little bit more detail will be available in the consultation results report that's being produced by the County Council and will be available for the 12th of February. That's my brief summary of the report. Hope that was useful. Happy to take any questions.
Good. Well, Dan and Sue were the two members on this, so I'm going to call Sue, so she's got anything to add first.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to take part. I attended, I think, every single meeting over the year, which were usually on Tuesday afternoons. So I have been involved with this as a long process, and some of things changed whilst we were in the course of our discussions, particularly the decision on day crewing plus, which obviously is a concern to a lot of people, particularly those that are employed in that system of work. The other point which I'd raised concerns over in that time was some of the wording within the questionnaire, and we discussed this at the last meeting, which was some words have different meanings to members of the public and to those who are involved in employment rights, employment law, and that was the use of the word flexibly, which for some people could cause alarm because it might look as if we're implying that there should be some change in the way that they're working, and it was not done with any intent to change anybody's conditions of work. One of the things that I asked at the last meeting was looking at Proposal 2, which says use our firefighters efficiently and flexibly to maximise our appliance availability, was perhaps we could look at the wording to remove efficiently and flexibly, which could imply that we're not doing that already, or that we want to impose some change, and to insert the word effectively, because that is the intention of everybody, and I would hope that is what we're doing already in any case. So it's just looking at possible the possible semantics of using a particular word in an employment context. Thank you.
In order, I know I've got Betty down. I've got you, Jeffrey. Okay, you go first, Betty.
It's just two. Sorry, it's just two points I wanted to make, and really the whole point is how the 10 minutes and how it's measured, and the public aware of the difference between a fire engine being there in 7 minutes and the difference that extra 3 minutes could make in terms of responding. That's one question. The other question really is around the respondents to the consultation. I actually looked, and if you look at the ethnicity of the respondents, they are very high in terms of white people actually responding. If you look at the ethnicity, 85% were white, English, Welsh, Scottish, and people like myself from the north of Ireland. I'm not saying Northern Ireland is the north of Ireland for me. but the point I wanted to make, what else can we do, or what have we not done to engage other ethnic groups? Thank you.
It'd be nice if we got more responses than 282, to tell you the truth. Shall we save the questions, because we've got quite a few speakers? So next, you, Jeffrey.
Yes, Chair. Impressed with this. You've obviously done a lot of work, but it's disappointing by the number of things that have come back. But just a report, I said I'd bring it up today. We have Obi Town Forum meetings, and on the 15th of October we were expecting somebody from the fire service on the agenda to come, and nobody turned up. And the same was last night. Now, last night I understand that you're probably doing the day job. I think there was a big fire somewhere. But on 2 occasions it was on the agenda for somebody to come to the Obi Town Forum meetings, 15th of October and 21st of January, and we didn't get a response. We were looking around the audience. So just a report in, Chair, but impressed with the work you've done, but disappointed with the number of responses.
So I'll split them up for you, Chief. So we've got 3 people asked questions, and I've got 3 more. So if you answer those 3 first, then you won't. So I'll call you now.
Thank you, councillors, for the comments. The first one, I think, just to reassure members about the wording of the 10 minutes. We believe that our current 10-minute attendance standard and our 20-minute attendance standard aren't what the public would expect. And we've advised you over the last 2 years, and certainly as we were building up to the HMI inspection, that we felt that the average person would believe when we say 10 minutes, it's from the time they start speaking to our control operator to the time that we arrive for a life-threatening incident. Currently, that isn't the case. As we sit here today, the way that the time is measured is a member of the public will dial 999, speak to a BT operator, then will be put through to whatever emergency service. When they speak to our control room staff will probe them for information about the incident. They will gather what information they need, and they will get a proposal from our mobilising system. That is then sent to the relevant station, and the relevant station then responds by firefighters moving to the appliance or on-call firefighters moving to the station. The clock does not start until that fire appliance or that crew actually book mobile to incident. It's a very specific term in our terminology, and the clock stops when they arrive. We don't think that's what the public would expect. So the proposal of 10 minutes is to, what we believe, align their expectations with what should be a reality. So this proposal is that in the future, when a control room operator starts to receive the call, the clock starts then. We know factually, because we've done some deeper dive into that that's going to be a struggle for us, because there are parts of our county that are really rural. Even if we had fire engines sitting with the engine running now, to get there in 10 minutes is not possible. And that's why the wording in the proposal is an average of 10 minutes for a life-threatening incident. But what we have to also accept is that there are further proposals in that consultation that look to give education and information to people who are in more rural areas. So what we're trying to do is, where we know there are areas that are difficult to reach in life-threatening incidents, that we try to get people informed so that we can change incidents from life-threatening to non-life-threatening. So the simple message may be, if you've got a fire, we want you to get out and stay out. That changes the risk for our firefighters responding, because they know they're not going to a life-threatening incident, and it means that we will not fail on our attendance standards. So the two things are intertwined. So any confusion over the 10 minutes, I'm not sure why that's come about, and apologies if it has. Where the 7 minutes that you refer to come from, I have no idea, so I can't answer that part. I'll ask Chris to respond in regard to the respondents' comments and the ethnicity issues.
Yes, in response to that question, we really have tried. What we've done is, actually, when we've actually gone out to the various community groups, etc., via email, we've actually asking people to share with their networks and their communities. We're looking for gatekeepers, if you like, and ways into some of these communities to say, actually, this is the information, please share and educate, and if it's a family member, if it's a community group, etc., to share that. And we made that point at all of the advisory group meetings, etc., and whenever we've been out. And on the stakeholder list that received the email, there's a vast number of community groups, etc., that are recorded in those stakeholder lists, where we've asked them to share and spread the word. The other point I would make is that on the Facebook targeting costs that we've incurred on page 73, we actually paid Facebook extra money to target LGBT and BAME groups as part of that, to try and, again, increase the spread and the reach in some of those areas that we've not managed to engage with particularly well in the past. So we're absolutely conscious of it, and I'm always open to fresh and new ideas into how we can improve it again further.
John, if I can deal with Councillor Kaufman's questions as well. Firstly, apologies that our staff failed to turn up, and certainly apologies that they didn't let you know why they hadn't turned up. So that's something I will follow up. The 15th of October, I will make sure my head of response, who sits in the gallery, comes back to you directly to find out why that didn't take place. But I'm informed that last night we had, and you may be aware that we had a large-scale incident at Colville which absorbed a number of our operational response. Now, I would expect today someone who should have been there last night to at least send a message to say, I'm really sorry they didn't get there last night. We were committed, rather than do nothing. But I'll follow those both points up.
Also, on the 282 responses, I understand 50% of the responses were from people that work for us. And I generally find when you consult people, it's like a planning application. If it's controversial, you'll get loads of bloody moaners. But if there's nothing much going on, people tend not to bother. And I think in this instance, this RMP, there's nothing much going on compared to when we tried to show Central last time, which caused an absolute bloody hoo-ha. Shall I move on now to Maggie?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment, really, and picking up on the numbers, because although the response numbers were very disappointing, given the range of methods and responses you tried to engage people, I was really reassured to receive the comments from, I think you engaged, you said, with Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, from somebody in the business to receive that compliment. I think it reassures us that, you know, that it's good and the risks that we're looking at are correct. So thank you.
And also, I mean, 12,000 hours of man time, wrong political expression, person time is a lot. Can I move to James now?
Thank you, Leader. Again, a question directly from what you've just said. I understand it is 1,200 hours. What's that man hours or person hours? What does that equate to financially? Because obviously that isn't included in the 8,328. So I'm just interested in that figure. And in regards to the consultation targeting BAME, specifically, I'm thinking of this. Have we gone to community centres? Have we gone to temples, mosques, and sort of done physically, they've done presentations? Or sometimes I know for planning consultation you have boards, don't you, that are left up for a week or 2 weeks with forms. Have we done that sort of thing?
What Councillor Govind is the last one.
Surprising you pinched my question, James. Rick, I'm just going to follow up from what Jamie is saying. Clearly, there is a lack of communication, especially in BME environment. We live in diversity, diverse communication. And looking at your consultation costs, especially on the social media, you spend just £300. Now, obviously, in BME community, there's lack of social media. So we need to go out in the community, as James said, temples, mosques, and various other places of worship. That need to be done on a small community basis or one-to-one basis, if I put it in that context. Especially during the festival period, that could become. People like us who hold community ward meeting, you can come and do the presentation there. I mean, we got one coming in our ward sometime in February. We will invite you, Rick, and from your office you can do the presentation, because that time scale you mentioned, that 10 minutes, and by the time you attend the site, not many communities are aware of that. They just take face value of, the fire authority or emergency service or blue light service will be there in 10 minutes or 12 minutes. That's our perception of back of our mind. But nobody knew that the time you do the conversation. So I think that need to come out in the community. And consultation need to be done in diverse community, because there are a lot of fire taking place within where I live as well, and nobody knew how to go about. And they're in the environment that have to put up with it, unfortunately.
Okay, I can respond. Sorry, Chairman, is that it? In terms of responding, I'll try to take each one. I've been advised that 1,200 people hours equates to approximately £30,000 worth of effort. Not sure how close that is, but it's approximate like the hours were. the reach, and I think that picks up on both of your points. I think it's disappointing for me to feel that you don't think we've done enough. I have to tell you, on a personal level, I went to the Janes Centre and sat in front of a faith group. I've went to the race relations group. I've sat in front of the disabilities groups. I've sat in front of a number of groups. To feel that you don't think we've been close enough. If you think we've got capacity to do one-to-one visits, then I think you're in a place that we are not. We do not have that capacity. We have a day-to-day business to do. I just don't have that physical resource to do that. We've made a huge amount of people efforts to sit in front of lots of groups, LGBT groups. In fact, colleagues in this room have been to a number of very diverse groups where the attendance has been very low. We actually reported back to the F-Page group through the police on 2 occasions, and I know for a fact that we came here and asked about the ward meetings and said to councillors, if you've got ward meetings and would like us to come, then we would certainly come. And I'm not aware that any requests for our attendance were made that we didn't meet. And if we have not met them, like Councillor Kaufman said, then please let me know. And if we found you, then of course we'll take that on the chin. But we've done a lot of personal effort to go out and to reach all groups, irrelevant of where they are located. I think the issue about spend is a really important one. I think if we'd have come here with a expenditure that may have been in a £20,000 or £30,000 for 290 returns, you may equally be critical of my team for spending money, public money, on something that delivered a very poor return. I think the balance and the difficulty with consultation, and a consultation period unfortunately coincided with what appeared to take over, and in fact it took over your last meeting in December, which was the general election. So we were competing with a lot of people's times. So, if we've let you down, I really apologise for that. But personally, I think we've put, and I would commend my own team for their efforts. I know many of them spent lots of time in the office, out of hours, over weekends, going out to reach people, and I'm really grateful to their efforts. So thank you.
Okay, I have no fresh speakers, so I'm going to let Sue have the last word, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Just to support what Rick just said, I know that I did a presentation in the city for councillors, and at that point I did say you could invite people, or I actually recommended that they invite people to our ward community meetings. But you have to send the invitation, and you have to tell officers that you want that to happen, and you also have to be aware that sometimes events beyond the control of firefighters can intervene if they're needed to be somewhere else urgently, that sometimes there can be problems. I think, though, in conclusion, I just want to thank everybody that took part, and at the initial stages when we were looking at the data around the availability of appliances and their location, the responses to incidents, was something I found impressive and reassuring, because it showed that on the whole everybody is in the right place and at the right time to be able to respond to the needs of people in distress in the communities that we serve. So I would like to thank everybody, all the firefighters that provided the information for that and showed how effectively we are working on the whole.
Thanks for that, Sue. I'd like it put on record to thank Sue and Dan Harrison for the work they did and for your positive comments, and also thanks to you and your team, Rick. I know you put in a lot of effort to get 282 responses, and it is a bit disappointing, but we are where we are. So we've got some recommendations: that we note the results of the public consultation exercise attached at Appendix 1 to the report. If I move it, Vice Chairman? Are we all happy with that then? Perfect, thank you. As agreed earlier, we'll take the urgent agenda item. This item is exempt. So the date of the next meeting, before we go there, is at Birstall. At the moment, Cowinder will chair it because I've been summoned down to meet the Secretary of State, but he might well cancel me at the last minute. If I can get, I will get, and I'll let you know as soon as I can. If I can't get, I'll send a substitute, Cowinder. Okay, so agenda item 14 is the exclusion of the press and public. as it is exempt, I move that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 4 and 10 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that in all circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. I'll move that.
I'll second that.
All happy with that? Thank you. Now, if we give it a couple of minutes, we have to wait for the YouTube to go off, and anybody who's not allowed to be in here will have to leave.